sorry. I was wondering. I was like, how is this possible? I feel so much now. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Please don't kick me off the panel.
Okay, so I think we're live, as far as I understand.
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay. So let me then maybe start off by welcoming everyone online to this webinar. It's called Beyond Land, Gender Equality and Restoration. And yeah, we're going to be talking about some of the key issues and concerns and opportunities that relate to gender equality in the context of this global push to bring hundreds of millions of hectares into restoration. And what we especially want to talk about is why we think researchers and advocates and practitioners, and others working at the nexus of gender equality and in the environment should be engaged in this restoration agenda. So we have a panel today. We have Stephanie Keene, who is the Senior Tenure Analyst at the Rights and Resources Initiative. We have Jacqueline Siles, who's a Senior Gender Program Manager at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Then possibly joining us is Concepta Mukaza, Forestry and Environment Program Manager at the Association of Uganda Professional Women in Agriculture and Environment. She's had some problems with the connection, so we're still hoping we can get her. My name is Marcus Jalanen. I'm a Research and Engagement Officer at CFOR, the Center for International Forestry Research, and I'll be moderating this panel. We are also organizing this panel, this webinar in partnership with the Global Landscapes Forum, and we have Selina Abraham, who is the youth coordinator for GLF, and she's helping us behind the scenes with the organization and moderation. And we're also organizing this webinar as the GLF Gender Constituency, which is a new initiative that's currently taking shape. The constituency is open to everyone, and if after this webinar you feel inspired and you want to learn more about the constituency and its work, please get in touch with me. A few words in housekeeping. This webinar lasts for about an hour, and we will begin by hearing short interventions from each of the panelists, and after this we'll have time for a Q&A session. So you can submit your questions throughout the webinar in the chat box that's below. And I'll do my best at collecting those questions. Try to please address your questions to a specific speaker if possible. So then, just before, I think Concepta has joined us.
Hi.
This is fantastic.
At last.
Okay.
Love to have you.
So let me just before moving to the first panelist, I just wanted to start by briefly explaining why I believe this is a really important topic for feminists and gender equality advocates to engage with. And I can just also suggest that if all the other panelists can just mute their mics during the so we only have one mic at a time. So just to begin, where is this global push for restoring land and ecosystem coming from? You have according to WWF, half of the world's topsoil has been lost over the past 150 years. And IUCN estimate that half of the world's tropical forests have been deforested or degraded since 1960. So in addition to the intrinsic value of these natural ecosystems, the trends also impede on different ecosystems' abilities to provide really critical services to humans and wildlife and other living things. And so these challenges are, of course, they're not new, and there are already many initiatives that are addressing biodiversity conservation or agricultural productivity or reforestation, etc. And under each of these themes too, gender equality advocates have been really active in trying to safeguard women's rights, push for inclusion and equitable outcomes, etc. But one common criticism that has been leveraged against some of these initiatives is that a lot of these efforts tend to kind of take place in silos, and they can sometimes even appear at odds with each other, especially since the world's land resources are quite limited. So, where some are saying we need a piece of land to increase food production, to feed the population. Others, climate mitigation initiatives might prefer switching to biofuel production. Conservationists might propose natural regeneration. and cash crops might be the ones providing the best economic returns to farmers' investments. So to be very brief, the idea behind landscape restoration is to try to consider different land uses in a given landscape, as opposed to a plot or individual site. And then jointly, together with, ideally jointly with other stakeholders at different levels, try to identify what are some of the priority sort of ecological functions that need to be restored, what are some of the potential trade-offs and conflicts, and then try to jointly propose different options, including technologies or land use planning to address some of these challenges. So in 2011, the Bond Challenge was launched to get governments to restore 150 million hectares by 2020. This was then extended to 350 million hectares in 2030 in the New York Declaration of Forests. And last month, the UN declared the coming decade as the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. So the way the global partnerships on forest landscape restoration define landscape restoration is that it encompasses efforts to both restore ecosystem function as well as enhancing human well-being. And so what I personally really like about this is that this kind of landscape approach in combination with human well-being being an integral part of FLR, it gives a kind of conceptual framework for bringing together the different bits of work that different actors are doing on social inclusion or safeguards or gender equality and women's empowerment across the whole spectrum of rural development or environmental protection or climate change, etc. But then the flip side of it is that these all-encompassing concept is that there's no commonly agreed definition or any mechanism for validating what can or can't be considered restoration. So while governments are looking to report on progress in meeting these spatial targets, restoration on the ground is designed and implemented and financed by a whole host of different actors, and they all have different agendas, they all have different priorities, and they all have different needs. So this can range from government-led tree planting schemes to community agroforestry initiatives to red plus schemes or to private sector tree plantations. And there, for those of us who are concerned about inclusion and equity and justice, what we need to be asking, of course, is whose voices are heard in these processes, whose needs and priorities matter, and who bears the costs and reaps what benefits. So to move on to our first panelist, I wanted to ask Stephanie. We know that tenure security is really key to long-term investments in land. And while strengthening rights could perhaps incentivize restoration, we also seen how communities with weaker land rights have been dispossessed or ignored in different initiatives that have been aimed at different environmental issues. So you've done a lot of work in community land rights across the world. And so from your perspective, do you think we're prepared for this global push for bringing hundreds of millions of hectares of land into restoration in an equitable and just way? Especially from a gender perspective, what are some of the red flags or concerns that you would raise?
Thanks, Marcus. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
Okay.
I would certainly say that there's a lot of work left to be done, and that when we think about the land restoration agenda, as your comments suggested, we need to think about inclusion. And one of the first questions that we really need to be asking is to what extent are Indigenous peoples, local communities, and especially the women members of those communities able to actually shape what restoration means. So I'm proposing we take particular time to consider the specific position of a large population, including women, that is both historically marginalized, that seeks to either directly benefit from or be harmed by activities enacted in the name of restoration, and that primarily hold rights to resources at the community level. So tenure security is obviously a key enabling factor, allowing communities and specific community members to influence, participate in, and benefit from land restoration processes. And what this means is that we need to know and increase the extent to which Indigenous and rural women, as well as their communities, have legal rights and have legally recognized and secure tenure rights. And this reflects Indigenous and local communities' role in stewarding and managing sustainably much of the world's rural landscape, as well as their dependence on those lands for their livelihoods and cultural identities. Global estimates reveal that up to 2.5 billion Indigenous and local community members hold and use the world's community lands, which some estimates comprise as much as 65% of the global land area. And with respect to restoration areas in particular, ongoing RI research in collaboration with IFRI and others also shows that in 46 countries recognizing community-based tenure rights across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, there's a total restoration area of almost 13 million square kilometers that's populated by about 339 million people. So obviously we have a very large population at stake. Many of them are Indigenous and rural women. And our tenure data on women's legally recognized rights to both community lands and natural resources demonstrates that a lot remains to be done if women's needs, priorities, and contributions to landscape management, conservation, and use are all going to be properly reflected in the restoration agenda. RI's 2017 study, Power Potential, for instance, captures the status of Indigenous and rural women's legally recognized rights to approximately 78% of the world's elmic forest. And what it demonstrates is that across the 80 legal frameworks recognizing community forest tenure that we identified in 30 countries, the specific rights of women are just seldom recognized. The results were incredibly poor. So the study actually looked at whether women's community level rights to membership, inheritance, voting, leadership, and dispute resolution were recognized legally with respect to community forests. And we found that these rights were only adequately protected between 3 to 29% of the time, depending on the specific right in question. In addition, while all 30 focus countries have ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and while most also have national constitutions that somehow guarantee equal protection broadly for women, most laws that actually regulated the everyday lives of women in their larger communities and their relationships to community lands and forests were incredibly gender blind. So this is a huge problem because we know that women don't actually benefit from gender neutral laws in practice. And of the 5 community level rights that we assessed, women's rights to vote in community general assemblies and to participate in community leadership bodies received the lowest level of adequate gender specific statutory protection. And this is a major obstacle because Indigenous and rural women's inclusion in land restoration efforts requires these rights in particular to be recognized and actionable. And they're the most essential entitlements for women to really engage with a variety of actors surrounding decisions on land restoration, what that should look like, and whether proposed actions are actually in fact just and sustainable from their perspective and the perspective of their larger communities. So in a forthcoming analysis, I should also mention on legally recognized freshwater rights, we have also found that the recognition of Indigenous and rural women's rights to use and govern freshwater is especially poor. So all of these factors are troubling, but the water point is troubling because water is obviously a key and necessary component of any land restoration effort. So, but on top of all of this, we also need to ask ourselves if the overall tenure rights of communities, including women, which include women, actually enable communities to actively benefit from and participate in restoration processes. And our land area data shows that globally, only about 18% of the global land area is formally recognized as being owned by or designated for communities. As you may recall, some estimate that community lands comprise as much as 65% of the global land area. And then our 2017 forest area data demonstrates that only 14% of global forests were cumulatively designated for or owned by Indigenous peoples and local communities as of 2017. So we clearly have a very long way to go. However, I do want to say there is hope on the horizon because since 2002, the global forest area designated for and owned by communities globally has increased by at least 40%. And there's been a particular uptick in the rate of legal recognition of community forest ownership, which is extremely positive. And if we were to just implement existing legislation in 4 countries, Colombia, the the Democratic Republic of the Congo, India, and Indonesia, the world would actually double gains made in the past 15 years. And of course, we could achieve much more if other countries followed suit. So if we can accelerate gender-sensitive recognition and implementation of community land and resource rights, we will greatly increase the likelihood of implementing a restoration agenda that actually restores ecological integrity while also improving human well-being in a manner that leaves no one behind, that includes Indigenous peoples, local communities, and women community members, and that ensures a just outcome for all three of those groups.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I think you point out really nicely the from a global perspective, the state of recognition of women's rights and the way in which that translates to abilities for different groups and communities, women included, to participate in some of these processes and to benefit from them. And that kind of brings me to the importance of having a voice in these processes. And so what we know from a lot of the research that has been done in the field of environment is that gender roles and relations tend to influence the way in which men and women engage with natural resources, what types of needs they have, what types of priorities they have. So Jackie, I wanted to ask you, IUCN has been doing a lot of work on restoration and on especially trying to come up with a gender-responsive methodology for designing restoration initiatives. So from your perspective, what are some of the ways in which you've seen gender roles or relations influencing the different types of priorities and needs that different groups of women and men have in relation to restoration? And what are some of the key challenges or lessons for ensuring an equitable participation in priority setting and implementation of restoration?
Thanks, Marcus. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank to the colleagues for the opportunity of participate today in the webinar. Well, when we restore the land, as Marcus was mentioning, what we're trying to do is not only regain the ecological functionality of the different ecosystems present in the landscape, but also enhancing human well-being across the deforested and degraded land. Restoration will require people involvement. And when I talk about people, I'm referring to the women and men living in those landscapes, which require to be restored because their livelihoods depends on the quality and quantity of the natural resources that they are available there. We all know people have the right to participate, but it is important to ensure that the involvement are in an equitable but also in an active way, and that they can participate in processes related to decision making, even the establishment of the goals for restoration of the most important things related, for example, to the implementation of the activities for restoration. But if we want the women and men fully engaged in landscape restoration, we need also to understand that their interests for it can be different, and that these differentiated interests and needs can be due to the gender roles and relations in a society. Here, I think it's important to highlight that when we refer to gender, we mean to the array of a society constructed roles and relationships, personality traits, attitudes, behaviors, values, and relative power and influence that society ascribes to the two sexes on a differential basis. So the best way to understand and identify differentiated interests of women and men for restoration is to do a gender analysis. The gender analysis is a systematic approach which helps us to identify gender-related risks and opportunities, constraints, social norms and beliefs, and patterns of power and decision-making. And here, I'm emphasizing the importance of doing the gender analysis because there is a body of an increased body of evidence demonstrating that gender-blind restoration efforts are likely to reinforce and even exacerbate pre-existing gender inequalities. So women and men depend on natural resources available in the landscape in different ways. And if our efforts for restoration, we do not consult both of them, we could end having a process that only includes the interests of half of the population, which generally will be the main interest because they are the ones who usually decide at the community. In our work in IUCN, promoting forest and landscape restoration in different countries, we have found conditions where the only option for restoration is to use species of trees with high value for timber. But when we go to do the gender analysis of the communities, we found out usually that men are the ones interested in trees for timber, for construction, for producing, for example, furniture or charcoal. All these interests are linked to the commercial purposes. However, when we go to those communities and talk to the women and ask them about their interests, what they usually says is that they are interested to plant trees because they want trees, for example, that produce firewood, so they can reduce the numbers of hours collecting the source of energy for cooking. But they also want to plant these kind of trees because they want to reduce also the possibility to suffer gender-based violence when they collect the firewood. They're interested in having access to technologies that make them to use less firewood, but also to have a healthy condition for cooking. They're interested in planting trees because they are a source for food security, but also a source for income that they can manage. They're also interested in having trees that can provide them with natural medicines because this helps them with the role of taking care of sick people. But they also want trees to ensure them to have access to water now and in the future because due to the gender roles in society, women are usually the ones in charge of fetching the water for the family. So the information gathered in the communities show that women and men obtain different products, receive different benefits, and have differentiated knowledge of the resources. So having the opportunity to gather this information has given us the possibility to increase the options of trees used for reforestation and to provide options that satisfy not only men but also women's needs. We want both women and men to participate actively in initiatives linked to landscape restoration because the initiatives are more effective and efficient. The gender data gathering during the gender analysis can also be used in other types of analysis during the landscape restoration planning. For example, during the application of the restoration opportunities assessment methodology, the ROM methodology that we use in IUCN and we use it in Malawi, national data on gender and socioeconomic issues, such as, for example, access to markets, food security, and population density, was overlaid with sex disaggregated population statistics during the creation of the multi-criteria maps for restoration. And as a result, in the multi-criteria map, they were able not only to highlight the areas for prioritizing food security interventions, but they were also able to include areas where women could be specifically targeted for enhance the impact. But restoration is not only planting trees. It could also be the implementation of better agriculture and water and soil conservation practices. In several countries in Latin America and in Africa, we were able to analyze these options of conservation practices with women groups involved in forestry, agriculture, even in fisheries, and they were able to provide us with the information about the impact of these practices and the daily workload, but also the benefits that they could perceive from those conservation practices. And this information was really important because it helps the government of the countries to produce a restorative package that will consider not to increase women work life, but also increase to reduce gender inequalities. So I think with this information I have provided previously, you can have a better understanding of the way in which gender roles and relations influence men and women's priorities in needs and restoration. I would like to take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the challenges that we have found, or what things we have learned to promote equitable participation in land restoration. The first thing is that we always have found a lack of awareness about the importance and even a lack of capacity to work with gender issues by the governments or institutions in charge of leading the landscape restoration in the countries. To overcome this challenge, we have include capacity building session on gender and landscape for the teams and for the people, for the government. And we also have promote the coordination among different ministries. And this is tackling something that Marco was mentioning in relation to working in silos. And what we have done, for example, is to get together the ministries of forestry, agriculture, water, and fisheries with the Ministry for Gender of the Secretaries of Gender, not only with the objective that they learn and develop their knowledge, but also they start collaborating together at the local level and recognizing the linkage across the different sectors and to design tailored interventions that respond to women's needs in relation to food security, water, access to energy, and livelihood needs. Lack of women participation due to gender inequalities is another challenge that we face. But here, we cannot respond with only one activity. We need to have as a strategy of set of activities or intervention to address this aspect. And here, for instance, we could strengthen women's voice through organization, enabling them to work collectively to promote access to resources, finance, technology, and equipment. We could organize this organization can also amplify women's voice and advocating for land restoration landscape, especially in the governance process. Supporting women leadership and empowerment is fundamental. It will require tackling discrimination and other barriers that women face in these spaces of governance. We will need to support and strengthen women's research tenure. And this will require sometimes change laws or reinforce the ones that promote to overcome customary laws that maintain gender inequalities. We could also need to improve finance tools to increase women economic access as well as increase women agency. And we also face, for example, the lack of desegregated gender information, or desegregated data in local and national level. And they make us, to go into the local communities and try to gather that information. And I will stop here due to time, but we can continue the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Now we had Concepta there for a moment, for a moment online, but I think she's lost the connection again. And so I thought, because we wanted to ask Concepta to talk about a bit about the way in which the costs and the benefits that are associated with landscape restoration might be influenced by gender roles and relations. And I can maybe just give a brief example. This isn't per se a restoration initiative, but it kind of exemplifies some of those dynamics in Uganda, where Concepta has been doing a lot of work, and we've had a project there together, which is coming to an end now. And I just wanted to give this example, but I think it kind of it kind of shows some of these, the kind of importance that that Jackie placed on making sure that the interests and the preferences and the needs of different community groups are incorporated, how those things play such a huge role in then trying to, when you're looking at the outcomes in terms of some of the benefits and in terms of some of the costs that different groups incur. So in southwestern Uganda, there's a situation where land is quite scarce and subdivided, so very fragmented. The average land size is about 1/4 of an acre. And so traditionally, you've had women producing a lot of food crops in that area. But recently, there's been a surge in the national demand for timber, which has meant that particularly richer men with a bit more of land, have planted a lot of timber trees. These are usually fast-growing exotic species like eucalyptus or pine. And so that has been exclusively done by men. And the reason for that is that, one, because women don't own land in that area, that means that the decision-making over harvesting timber is usually reserved to the male landowner. The second thing is that women can't pass on land to their next of kin, which means that especially for older women who might have actual user rights to the land, because after their husband has passed on, then they still don't really have incentives to plant a lot of trees. But what also happens is that these tree plantations, when they're planted really close to the women's food crops plots, they suck out a lot of the water from the ground, a lot of the nutrients, and they crowd out these food plots. And so the women's focus groups that we've talked to, they said it really hurts food security. It really hurts their income generating opportunities. But when you look at the situation from above, it kind of looks like a nice landscape mosaic with, a bit of food plantations, a bit of food over here, a bit of trees and timber over here. But then when you zoom in and you consider the ways in which you consider the power relations that are there on the ground, you realize how the sort of neglect of those power relations in the way in which these things are taking place on the ground, you see how the benefits are really differentiated between women and men. But I wanted to ask if anybody has any questions at this point. You can post those questions either in the chat box, or you can post them in the ask a question. If you click under or at the bottom of the screen, you can either put it in the chat box, which some of you have found, or in the ask a question area.
Marcus, I would like to react what you just was mentioning, and it's the fact that we said it many times, is the importance of having a gender analysis and really understanding the dynamics, because as you mentioned, from the Zoom, the trees and the landscape will look really good, but when we go and see what really is happening at the community level, we're increasing inequalities, and we have one sector of the community that has been already in a disadvantaged condition to worsen that condition. So we have to really make sure that we have a real understanding of the relationships and the dynamics that a project can change. In this case, a project or initiative related to landscape restoration.
Thanks, Jackie. I see there's a question from Tanya McGregor about getting the links to the data sources and studies that Stephanie was talking about. I think that Stephanie, do you want to?
Hi there. Yes, thanks so much, Tanya, for your interest in our data. If you go to rightsandresources.org, you can find all of our under the RI tenure data tab, you'll find links to all of our analyses, in particular, Power and Potential, which is the analysis on women's rights to community forest. It's 2017 analysis that's there. There's also follow-up reports. At a Crossroads has the forest area data I was referencing, and Who Owns the World's Land has the land area data. All of that is available on our website, and our forthcoming data on freshwater will be published this summer.
Thank you. There's another question here from Stefan about what are some of the ways to measure or assess the extent of gender equity or engagement at the landscape level, so jurisdiction or watershed level. I'm thinking maybe that's something that we can all try to chime in on. Do you wanna start, Stephanie?
Sure. With respect to the recognition of gender equity and gender equal rights to various resources, RI's own data identifies legal frameworks that create specific avenues for particular kinds of communities, either indigenous or local, to avail themselves of those rights. And we, in some instances, can say definitively that those legal frameworks pertain to specific geographical areas. In other cases, that's not the case. That's not possible. But looking specifically at a landscape from a legal perspective, at least, if you're interested in knowing what the tenure rights are and to what extent they're recognized, you really do need to consider which framework applies to which basin or which watershed area or whatever the geographical scope might be. And in reality, it's very possible, because so many different communities live in a particular area, they could be actually subject to very different levels of legal recognition. So the strength of one community in the same area could be wildly stronger than another, or vice versa. So again, when we're taking a landscape approach, whatever the area is, you really do need to consider the specific legal entitlements of the various parties involved, because they are not typically the same.
Yeah, I think maybe if I can add to that, I mean, I think that, if you kind of start with the extent of the legal recognition, I think that's a good point to start. But then, of course, a lot of the research that CIFOR has done, and others too, kind of points out that even in instances where you may have some level of recognition for the rights of either community rights or even specific recognition of women's rights, that doesn't necessarily mean that those rights are translated into practice on the ground.
Absolutely.
So we often need to kind of complement those things with a more qualitative analysis of even just the tenure rights. Mm-hmm. But then I think what kind of, if you link this to the broader scope, and link it to the things that we've all been talking about, you have that the legal recognition and your ability to act on those rights with respect to tenure. But then, of course, there are other things too. Jackie was mentioning, the importance of being able to participate in the processes from the offset, and that means about having a voice in trying to influence the very direction of restoration. So what are the priority functions that need to be restored? What are the priority tree species that need to be planted? What are the different types of approaches that different groups of community members and other stakeholders would want to see? And that means both having a voice in the process, but then also having some type of a mechanism that facilitates, to translate those different voices into some type of outcomes. Because a lot of times you also see that there's a mechanism in place to solicit inputs from different groups, but then whether or not that is then taken on to the actual design and implementation of these initiatives is another thing. Then you have, the aspect of the process itself, the implementation side of it. So who does what labor in terms of restoring? Who plants trees? Who is the one who bears the brunt of the labor cost when you're implementing, conservation agriculture or different things that change or increase the labor burden of different groups. A lot of times what we're seeing is that a lot of that labor falls on the shoulders of women. Then there's the question of immediate benefits. There's the question, if you have projects such as Red Cross or other types where you're sort of plowing back some benefits to those communities to, immediately try to or kind of compensate them for their labor or for, the opportunity costs. Who has access to those benefits? What type of benefit sharing mechanism do you have in place? And then there's the issue of the long-term benefits. So, Jackie was mentioning the issue about timber trees. So if you just plant timber trees, that's not likely going to benefit women in 40, 50 years when the trees have grown. So you have all these different levels, and you have all these different sort of phases in the cycle when you have different entry points for assessing the level of engagement and assessing the level of equity. And Jackie, did you want to add something to this?
Well, you have mentioned a lot, but I think measuring gender equity means that we need to be able to analyze what are the women participation. For example, if we see it at the watershed level, what is the women participation in that watershed? How women participate in the organization linking, for example, to water or to agriculture? Do they have voice? Do they really participate and make decisions? How are the structures of governance on those watersheds? Are they having internal rules that allow women to be there and the organizations? Are they trying to promote their voice? The issues of access, control, benefit, all those things related to the access and the resources and the watershed are really important to identify and to have a clear idea of the linkages. What are the cultural norms there that also, because culture has a really important impact in what allows women and men to do or not to do. So these is all the issues that we need to keep in our mind and our strategy, so we can respond and to overcome those cultural norms that are maintaining gender inequalities.
So there's a question here from Mirel from the Lebanon Reforestation Initiative. It's an interesting question. So it's about whether gender equality efforts in restoration, whether they benefit from changing gender roles, trying to eliminate the stereotyping of women and men in terms of what women do, what men do, in activities, or is it better to just work within the existing roles of women and men and try to use those roles to give more opportunity to women, for them to also benefit from restoration activities, but maybe in different ways than men? I don't know what you guys think.
I would say that it's definitely not an either or, and that different contexts require different approaches on the ground. For instance, we know because Indigenous and rural women in particular are so strongly embedded within their culture, because community rights are the predominant means by which resource rights is held, there's some evidence that if you only strengthen women's rights and don't also demonstrate the way that those rights and those advances benefit entire communities, that can throw off the balance within communities, hinder the way they function, and create larger issues. So if you perhaps strengthen women's ability to take over men's roles without creating some kind of dual process, you might end up in problems. But in other instances, that might actually be possible. Maybe you can make the case that women can engage in more activities that are traditionally male. And these things don't usually happen in isolated manners. Social change takes time, it's complicated, it's messy, and it really does so depend on the exact community context that you're engaged in. So the solution, I would say, is to start by just asking questions, making sure that you understand the dynamics of a particular community, what women want, what they're capable, what they're able at a given moment to pursue, and then work from there. Because the answer in one community may not be a workable solution in another.
I agree. because there is not only one way to work in this case. And but what is really important is that we requires to empower and support women, but also we require to men, and that they have time to think about their masculinity and the way they have been constructed, and to find ways to for both of them to really work together and to have relationships that are more equal. I'm busy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with both of you, and I think it's an interesting question. I think it's something that people talk about a lot, and you know what Stephanie said too about it not being an either or. I think it's a really critical thing to think about, because at this, I mean, you kind of have to both depart from. I mean, you are implementing these things in areas where these power differentials and these, you know, different structures already exist, and so you can't assume that, you know, you're coming in and you're implementing something and that it would just be take place in a vacuum. So you have to consider those things, you know, in the design of your. But then, of course, I mean, of course, the emphasis. I think that it is really critical to have, you know, to consider in these initiatives too, that one of the outcomes should be to try to address gender equality as a problem or as an issue of its own, rather than just consider it as an add-on in the project or as a sort of a means in order to get somewhere else. Because if you, and so because you see that the roles and the stereotypes and the power relations that go with those stereotypes in a lot of places are those exact things that then lead to, you know, to the fact that women, for example, have less incentives to plant trees. And so those, you know, when you address, say, norms about land ownership or inheritance rights, then that you're also creating an environment that enables more people to adopt better practices that are then going to give us better results in the future. So those things are really, I would say, they're really connected. And it really requires to try to, you know, try to address each of these problems in their own right, rather than just a means to something else. There's another question here from Luby about the African context, which is about how to help include more women and women's rights into landscape restoration and ensure the long-term success of these initiatives when you're facing the external challenges like government is giving concessions to foreign or transnational companies for mining or monoculture cultivation, etc. So how can you address this issue with and for women? Does Jackie or Stephanie, would you want to try to?
I can comment, at least from the perspective of legally recognized rights in Africa. In Empowering Potential, our analysis showed that regionally, if you compare findings in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, Africa lagged behind the other two regions, both with respect to recognizing women's rights to participate in community assemblies and other local level decision-making bodies, and with respect to inheritance rights, and particularly with respect to participation in community processes. As I'm sure you know, that the right to participate during negotiations with private actors, during private and public partnerships, to be at the table when contracts are being negotiated, those are incredibly critical to communities' ability and to women's ability to say no, obviously, when different concessions come up, and also then to pursue and chart their own path towards what both development and restoration should really look like. So particularly in an African context, I would say, both in terms of the realization and implementation of rights, focusing on local level governance is key. But the positive side from our data with respect to Africa and Indigenous and rural women in particular is that dispute resolution, internally at least, was actually the strongest right recognized when you compare the other regions. And so there's at least space at a community level oftentimes for communities to use local level community-driven dispute resolution mechanisms to voice their grievances and to potentially shift community norms in a way that are favorable, and that could eventually result in increased governance and participation that would then allow women to more strongly get at some of the issues you're discussing in your question. Anyone else?
Jackie, do you want to add something?
I can try to add something. We have found out that this is a case from Ghana for a company that had a concession for restoring degraded land. And it was really interesting for me to find out that this company was having a really internal process of strengthening gender mainstreaming into all the activities that the company was doing. They were developing a gender policy. They were doing a series of activities internally that were allowing the company to be able to have a different position and to allow women and men working on the communities to engage fully in the activities of reforestation. So that could be an opportunity, that the companies that have that concession can really be engaged in this kind of principles or equity that can be a bit. If it is not happening, I don't think that it's going to be any chance from the point of view of having those companies to do anything to promote women participation.
And I don't know, I think that, Stephanie and others, and probably correct me if I'm wrong, because it's not my strongest area of expertise. But I mean, one of the things that I've understood is that there also is, increasing recognition by some of these companies, in terms of making these large-scale investments in land, that, these types of unresolved conflicts isn't, in the end, is going to hurt the business in long term as well, and that there's more emphasis, perhaps, among some investors at least, to come up with these type of outgrower schemes or other things to kind of include local populations in different ways in the operations. But of course, there are a lot of issues there about on which terms are these negotiations being done, who is participating, what is the transformation from, say a smallholder agricultural landscape into a monoculture of one sort or another. What does that mean in terms of the gender division of labor in those areas? And so I think that I think what Jack is saying is really key there, and But I guess so. One of the things that C4 has been doing a bit of work with now is also trying to look at some of these areas where smallholder agriculture is happening in a quite extensive way, and perhaps on taking quite a high toll in the environment, and looking at are there ways in which some of the private sector companies who are involved in those areas might be able to, if there are incentives or ways in which you can combine land use planning with the ways in which private sector operates in some of those areas to try to perhaps promote more sustainable and intensified agricultural practices that would generate more, similar levels of productivity, but take less toll on the environment, while also sort of fostering a more equitable development in those rural areas. And I think that there are quite a, there are many ways to look at those things, but I think that's one area of work, at least, that is taking place now. So I'm not seeing any other questions. We have time for another question if somebody wants to type something in the box. Otherwise, does any of the panelists want to add anything? Any final thoughts?
And go ahead, Jackie.
I just would like to stress out the importance of having a gender analysis in any initiative related to forest landscape restoration, with the idea of that increasing inequalities. I think we have learned from other fields, and we have learned through the time that we need to engage women and men both in activities to make them really efficient and effective. And we know and have experience that we can do it, but it requires time, probably, and it requires some kind of extra effort, but we can do it, and we can, prevent perpetuating conditions that maintain inequality. So that's the thing that I want to add.
Yeah, and I would echo Jackie's comment on the fact that these things do take time, but also to say that there is real progress being made. I mean, Indigenous and rural women are not passive actors. They are incredibly active with respect to the defense of their land, their territorial resources, both on behalf of women and their entire communities. We've seen a lot of improvement, a lot of progress made in terms of women's representation at all levels of leadership in Nepal, in Peru, in other settings in Africa. And there's also, as Marcus said, a growing awareness across private sector actors and others of the importance of strengthening women's rights, of being aware of them from the outset. I mean, at the moment, RRI's interlocking group is in the process of revising or reviewing and considering a gender-specific guidance on how companies can better implement the principles in the voluntary guidelines on responsible tenure, for instance. So there is hope, and there is real opportunity, as I said, if we do recognize rights and implement women's interest in the framework of land restoration policies to really effectuate change. So it's definitely not something that doesn't have a ray of hope on the horizon. It's just for us to all take up the active, or take up the battle cry, so to speak, and to make sure that we're all focusing on gender in the larger ambit of our work.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with both of you, of course, and maybe just to round off, I wanted to just, I mean, at least from our perspective, I hope we've covered or we've made the case for why it's important that those of us who are working on issues that relate to social inclusion and gender equality in the area of agriculture, environment, rural development, all these types of things, that we need to be engaged in these conversations. And I think at least to me, I think this idea of landscape restoration and this agenda, it provides a good opportunity for us to come together. I see 107 people online now. I think it's a great opportunity for us to come together, to share experiences from different geographic areas, from different topics and different levels, because I know we're all working on different things. And so I just wanted to sort of end with that. We are hoping that the GLF gender constituency can be at least one of those places where we can come together, where we can share ideas, where we can come up with joint ways of how we want to approach things, joint advocacy, other things that we can talk about, and so I would just encourage anyone who would be interested after this call to get in touch with me, and we can continue these conversations. So I don't know. I guess we're at 59 minutes and 15 seconds. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So I just want to thank the panelists. I want to thank
you.
Jackie.
Thank you, Marcus.
Concepta, who submitted a video that we unfortunately weren't able to play, and she has been trying really hard to connect, but technology wasn't on our side today. And I want to thank all the participants to this webinar, and I'm really looking forward to hear from you and working with you soon again.
Thanks so much.